Hello, world, and welcome back to another episode of Practicing Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. My name's Sarah, and I'm here with my friend Lizelle. And today we're going to be talking about episode 27, which is called Problem Formulation. And so, as we always do, I'm going to pass it over to Lizelle to get us started with a quote.
Hello, world. I am capable at this stage still to stick with my resolution to read Plato. I'm reading from the Republic, book 9. Then we may begin by assuming that there are three classes of men: lovers of wisdom, lovers of honor, and lovers of gain. Exactly. And there are three kinds of pleasures, which are their several objects. Very true. Now, if you examine the three classes of men and ask of them, in turn, which of their lives is the pleasantest, each will be found praising his own and depreciating that of the others. The money-maker will contrast the vanity of honor or of learning if they bring no money with the solid advantage of gold and silver. True, he said. And the lover of honor, what will be his position? Will he not think that the pleasures of riches is vulgar, while the pleasure of learning, if it brings no distinction, is all smoke and nonsense to him? Very true. And are we to suppose, I said, Socrates speaks, he says, I said, that the philosopher sets any value on other pleasures in comparison with the pleasure of knowing the truth, and in that pursuit abiding, ever learning, not so far indeed from the heaven of pleasures? Does he not call the other pleasures necessary, under the idea that if there were no necessity of them, he would rather not have them? There can be no doubt of that, he replied. Since then, Socrates says, the pleasures of each class and the life of each are in dispute, and the question is not which life is more or less honorable, or better or worse, but which is the more pleasant or painless. How shall we know who speaks truly? I cannot myself tell. I think it's Glaucon who said, well, but what ought to be the criterion? Is any better than experience and wisdom and reason? There can not be anything better, he said. Then, Socrates said, reflect. Of the three individuals, which has the greatest experience of all the pleasures which we enumerated? Has the lover of gain, in learning the nature of essential truth, greater experience of the pleasure of knowing than the philosopher has of the pleasure of gain? The philosopher, he replied, has greatly the advantage, for he has of necessity always known the taste of the other pleasures from his childhood upward. But the lover of gain, in all his experience, has not of necessity tasted, or I should rather say, even had he desired, could hardly have tasted, the sweetness of learning and knowing truth. Then the lover of wisdom has a great advantage over the lover of gain, for he has double experience. Yes, very great. Again, has he greater experience of the pleasure of honor, or the lover of honor, of the pleasure of wisdom? Nay, he said, all three are honored in proportion as they attain their object. For the rich man and the brave man and the wise man alike have their crowds of admirers, and as they all receive honor, they all have experience of the pleasure of honor. But the delight which is to be found in the knowledge of true being is known to the philosopher only.
Says the philosopher.
But who else can say it? Only the philosopher.
Exactly. Yeah. Wow. That was great. I mentioned before we were recording that I finally got to the point where I could fall asleep during an episode because it just, when it's so over your head, you can really just, like you said, get numb. So in this episode, I had mental numbness, but got through it. And especially after we talked about it a little, I feel better about it.
Good. At least you didn't explode.
I
That's
didn't
always
explode, but I got close. It was just like shut down. Shut down, when your phone gets too hot now. And it's like you can't use this. That's kind of I think what happened. All
yeah.
right.
Like I just also want to mention, as I told you before we recorded, when I first watched the Awakening series, when I got to these, found it almost painful. It's very challenging to the point of being painful. And I told one of my friends, like, because before that I told her about this amazing series that I found online, and I'm watching it like, religiously. And then I told her like, oh, it's become so painful, and she said, just stop watching it. And that was more painful. The idea of stopping watching it felt like sacrilege in a way, maybe because it is somehow related to my calling, but it was just no, no, no. That's not an option. You have to push through. There's like, just because something is difficult,
Mhm.
or maybe when you realize something is difficult, you should know like, well, it's probably this is probably a bias or a heuristic, but it might be worth it. Press through. And I mean, John has proven that the things that he's given us up till now is so worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a friend telling you it's worth it.
Yes, we're still
So
cave diving. Well, that's true because things are not the way my brain was trained. And so this actually, for me, is really profound because we're going to take this bite by bite, but over this process, it feels like my brain's going to change because of now we're going to introduce a lot of new patterns, a lot of new ways of structuring, well, in this case, problems and seeing a different way of looking at the problems. So it feels expansive, just a little painful at first.
as is most expansions, I imagine.
Yeah.
So
So for
so
this
that
episode with problem formulation, we're trying to understand the capacity for intelligence of, so in doing so there's two different ways that he mentions we can go about doing this right now, I guess, which is to understand the brain itself as it is and already functioning, but then also to have this ability to create AI in order to kind of test out all of those ideas, which we'll get more into with this episode.
those are two ways of looking at the mind, and
Mm.
the results seem to integrate very well. Basically, he's that's part still of his summary of last time.
Okay, so basically, to get us into this episode, then this phrase might help. We're not focused on knowledge, but rather the technology of acquiring knowledge, which is intelligence, or the intelligence, um, maybe according to Newell and Simon, I think, is the capacity for general problem solving.
I think it's a general thing that the capacity for general problem solving is intelligence. But then they work with the problem. What is problem solving? Noel and Simon kind of takes it into those big parts, the different parts that he talked about last time. That you have your initial stage, you have your goal stage, you have your operators, and their path constraints, or
Mm-hmm.
operations and your path constraints. And that's what it's still on the board behind him. And so we're coming back to that, which is the problem space, the process of problem solving. So what he does say at a certain point here is like, we get so stuck on the end result, like we want knowledge,
Yeah.
that we don't look at the process, but the process is how we get the knowledge. So let's take a step back and look at the process and see what happens when we solve problems.
So yeah, solving is how you acquire the knowledge. Um,
Because he says that because we're like, well, if you put that nice diagram there, we can see the initial state, we can see the goal state, so we can easily see which is the best path. But we never have that view because alas, or thank God, we're not God. Um, and so he has like, we don't have God's point of view. So that's why we need to go through the process to learn. It's actually quite beautiful.
Hmm.
We need to go through this practice to learn.
Then we get to this word combinatorial explosion. 2 words.
I'm so jealous how easy you pronounce it. For some reason,
Oh.
the word just doesn't fit right in my mouth. Combinatorial explosion. Combinatorial explosion. I've referred to it in the past, but I don't know. So when I make boom, that's what I
Hmm.
mean. I
Hmm.
mean
Hmm.
combinatorial explosion.
Yes, and I imagine that might happen to you because how many languages do you know?
it's, it's just
This
a
one doesn't
some.
fit. That is a nice way of saying vast number. A vast number of, I guess, possibilities.
Overwhelming.
Yeah.
Combinatorial explosion is when your brain is overwhelmed and it just goes boom.
Yeah.
And yeah, then it gets to
Uh,
that FD, uh, which F is the number of operators and D is the stages you can go through. And he explains it with a chessboard and playing chess. And like, usually you have like, I don't know the numbers, like 30 possible moves in each stage, but some of them bad, but that's not the point. And then mostly, unless you're playing like that other, like that fool's game, it's mostly like 60. So it's a huge number that just a chess game comes to. So, and that is explaining or exemplifying what um, combinatorial explosion is about. Like
mm,
your options are so many that your brain is simply not capable of dealing with it all. And it's not because your brain is not amazing, because your brain is amazing. I think he says like the number of synaptic connections is like 5 times 10 to the
power of.
15. Thank you. And so it's amazing, the brain. But just to play a chess game, you need more synaptic connections than there are atomic particles in the universe. So
So use
that's
logic to resolve that problem.
it's
Yeah.
not going to happen. It's so yeah. It's like even just a fun game problem in life is
Hmm.
beyond our capacity to solve if we want to solve it step by step and like see the whole picture when we go in. It's
Yeah.
not within our capacity.
Yeah. I just want to like, now I kind of understand a certain moment in my life when all of the things were like, well, okay, so I was trying to pack up my stuff because I was leaving someone's house there. I was like taking refuge after leaving a relationship, and just because my whole life had shifted so much and there was so much different, I think I experienced this to the point where I'm sitting in the middle of this room with all of my stuff around me because I need to pack. I can't even pack. Like my brain won't, it doesn't even know the first operation to do in order to get me packed up, which I mean simply would just be let's just start loading shit into a box. But my brain was like, what order do I need to put them? What room is this going to go in? And what, like, yeah, it was not processing things in categories anymore. So I
Mm.
couldn't even figure out the first thing to do in that moment. I was just frozen.
You were incapable of relevance realization because of being overwhelmed emotionally. That's pretty cool. That's a very good example of
Mm-hmm.
how important it is that we have this unconscious skill of,
Yeah.
because like you said, it's the most simple thing. I need to pack.
Yeah.
Step one, get a box. We all know it. It's obvious. And that's when it comes to like so many things in life is
Mm-hmm.
obvious. You just go with the flow and do it. But as soon as there's like something like that, like emotional, being too completely emotionally overwhelmed, thrown in the mix.
Yep.
The brain just doesn't see the obviousness of the next step.
Yeah, we just can't sort through here, the next sentence. You can't search the whole space. And
Yeah.
that's why your brain goes into like overload and you just don't have the time, the machinery, or the resources to solve a problem that complex when there are so many options of scenarios or things you could do.
And yet we do it. And that is exactly John's, what he calls his professional obsession. Like, strictly speaking, we should not be able to solve any problems because it's just too vast. But we do it. We do it constantly. We pack constantly. We go on first dates constantly, which he says later is one of the big, actually quite a ill-defined problem. We talk to people and know how, there's so many problems that we solve on a day-to-day basis without even identifying them as problems. How do we do that? How do we know what where to look for solutions? And that is the big question that he's obsessed with. That's his own word. He's obsessed with zeroing in on the small subsection. You somehow zero in on the relevant information. His beloved relevance realization. But how?
Yeah, it's so interesting how if you've forgotten a song or something, when you stop trying to remember, you do remember. Or when you're looking for something and yeah, you get really frustrated, then for me, I have to take a break from looking for whatever it is. Because I'll sit there and tell myself there's only one place it can be. There's only one place it can be. It's just an object. There's only one place it can be. And so that used to like really tense me up. But yeah, there's now I just breathe, open up the space, and somehow it just drops in. So my brain knows where to look.
Maybe what you're trying to do when you're searching is you're trying to search the whole space, and that's not possible. So when
Yeah.
you allow your brain to kind of, okay, you go ahead, brain, you take over, it somehow zooms into the right, that pie that John draws. It goes exactly right to the spot where you can find it.
Yeah.
And
Almost like, here it is. I knew it all along. If you would have just
yeah,
listened to me.
he points out as well that one of the things that makes us crucially intelligent is your ability to zero in on the relevant information. So that I think is beautiful because yeah, like we just said, it's kind of like our brains are doing it for us, and somehow that we think, we are so smart, but we're not. It's like our brains are so awesome. It's like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
yeah, because that's what yeah. The more you're capable of not seeing the irrelevant things, and that's why in a moment of emotional panic, you're
Yep.
just not capable of relevance realization because emotions flood the brain and makes you unintelligent in that you're not capable of eliminating all the different possibilities because you're overwhelmed. I mean, that happens to people all the time. I think that's the whole burnout problem. Like, people just can't prioritize anymore. They have this inbox full of things, and if someone comes in and they're like, okay, I can see what's really urgent, what needs to be worked on immediately, and what can wait a little bit. But as soon as you're overwhelmed, you just can't see that anymore. A full inbox is just like, I have to just, sometimes I do that at work. If I feel overwhelmed, I'm like, fuck it. I'm going to start at the top of my inbox and work my way down. Like,
Hmm.
I know this is not the smartest way to act, but at least I'm acting.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
when I'm capable of, being relaxed and actually being able to identify what is urgent, I will do
Hmm.
that. But at this
Hmm.
stage, I'm not. So I'm going to send an email that's completely like not urgent. I'm going to respond to that because that's on top of my list. And sometimes we just have to do that.
I know that I'm making some sort of progress, even if it's not the most effective, efficient, productive progress. It's still something. And sometimes that's just what you need to do to keep moving. Like in the example of like packing up my stuff, it needed to just be in that moment. Put something in a box. Put something in a box. One step at a time. Don't look at the whole mountain. Look down at your feet.
And if you happen to put something in the wrong box, so be it.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the optimal place where we want to get to, of course, is if this relevance relation is working to its optimal, which is cool because John actually doesn't mention how important it is to be emotionally stable for this to work, and that is very much coming out now in our conversation.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
if you're emotionally fucked up, your biases just take over, and you're not capable of doing this really important thing called relevance realization.
Right. And like, oh, that just like brings up for me that doom scrolling idea. Like when people are going through a whole mess of emotions and then that 15 minutes of scroll time is over and then you just go back and now you've inherited all of those emotions. And now things are going to be relevant to you based on those emotions that you've just co-opted. Yeah, they're like contagious. You just caught those emotions.
Oh, wow.
And how irrational, well, maybe not irrational, sorry. But you know what I mean? Like how people are not using relevance realization in those
That
instances.
is irrational. That is exactly irrational, I would think. Not using relevance realization. Because he does come to like, there's nothing to do with logic. So, but yeah. No. So not everything to do with logic, I should say. Not.
Yeah. But definitely a factor in it. Like that's something to take into consideration how our emotions are so co-opted by media and social media, but also the news. And
Yeah, because he does mention here that he will teach us how to, well, I don't know if he says he will teach us, but he says there's a way that we can restructure our salience landscape. And that's what we're doing when we're scrolling through this. We're restructuring our salience landscape. And we might want to do it more mindfully, So
so I'm going to start following a bunch of millionaires with all their tips of how to get money. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, that's the idea. I mean, I definitely got that. Like, I had that presence of mind pretty early in the pandemic of like, I needed to curate my social media feeds. The things that I'm following need to be well curated. Can't just be going willy nilly and just pressing stuff just because, well, what's going on there? Like, no, actually recognize the reason that I'm attracted to that is because they've put things on there to make it touchable, clickable. But those are the things that I don't need to touch. And so I did have that, frame of mind, at least when I was building the social media that I follow. But still, there's biases in that too. So as we've learned. All right. So there's this argument that he presents that he's going to quickly debunk, which is that
well, it's not
deduction.
debunking it completely. He's just saying there's a small part that they missed.
Okay.
Important, but small part that they missed. Triangle.
Triangle. That's very relevant. Okay. So he says we can't turn into Mr. Spock. There's this argument, deductive logic is certainty. And what John says is that this argument is valid if it is impossible for the premises to be true and the conclusion to be false. And what I think that's pointing to is that we can't get to certainty because we can't search the whole space. Okay.
Yeah. Are we now at heuristics and algorithms? Because that sounded like what I have written underneath algorithm.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Oh, I just want to mention, I read now a direct quote from him. You can dynamically self-organize what you find relevant and salient. So that's good.
Yeah, that's good.
You can't choose your loves.
Yes, that was something we mentioned before.
Yeah.
Yes. You can choose your loves.
Yeah. And then he goes into Newell and Simon. And from Polia, they worked with heuristics and algorithms. And the algorithms is this Descartesian search for certainty. Because you're guaranteed to find indeed a solution or a proof that there is no solution. So there's certainty. But Descartes is doomed. It's basically
Yes.
suicide if you search for certainty.
And that's the issue that he keeps bringing up, where Descartes was doomed from the beginning, is because he chose math as the marker of reality to try to resolve the issue. At a helicopter. So because Descartes has math as the marker of reality, um, and he's trying to quell anxiety of the crisis of meaning by certainty. Like he thinks that certainty is the answer. Like, okay, we'll all feel less anxious about this whole dying thing or life thing if we can have certainty. And so that's kind of the thing here. It's like certainty might not be that easy to come about. It's not just like out there for you to find.
Mm-hmm. This is really sad to me. I just also had a personal like it's that whole being unhomed by the death of the universe and those things, and Descartes tried to feel safe, because if you don't have a home, you don't feel safe, and Descartes tried to feel safe by like, well, certainty will keep me safe, and I'm very prone to that. I'm very prone to that, which places a lot of stress on my relationships.
Mm.
So yeah,
Yeah, I
it's
know. Yeah. Well, okay, and I've had those like existential moments where I'm so uncertain. Like it gets me, I don't know, that yes, I could feel comfortable in the certainty because the uncertainty is terrifying. It's just, yeah, what's actually going on here?
yeah, and the thing John is saying here, and which is explaining very well, like, yeah, you can't be certain because you can't search the whole space, is like, you're never gonna have certainty. You need to look for another solution.
Mm-hmm.
So just in this problem solving thing, then, if we come back to the smaller problem, not
Yeah.
how can we feel safe in life, but how can we, solve problems correctly? Then they say, well, heuristics are the better option for increasing your chances of achieving your goal. So, yeah, you're not
Yeah.
sure, but you can't be certain anyways.
Right.
And
So algorithmic is just not sufficient in itself.
no, it's for most of real life problems, it doesn't work.
And then there's this heuristics, which is a form of bias that
Yes.
tries to specify where you should search. In all of that space, it tells you to prejudge what is relevant.
Pre-specify. So even before you start your search, it has this. So you have this prejudgment or prejudice, hence bias. Which brings us, in my mind at least, to that beautiful sentence we know and have this love-hate relationship to, because it's so true. The very things that make us adaptive make us prone to self-deception.
Seems to be as true as we can know anyway. So then there's the types of heuristics that he mentions briefly, which
Mhm.
are, I guess, available and rep.
Well, there are so many heuristics because there are so many types of biases. I do have a book that he recommended during the meditation course on biases on my shelf. I don't have it here, but there's so many different biases. He mentions, I think, one or two. I think, are you talking about the car example, the car and airplane?
Yeah, he's gonna get into a car. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's just one of like so many biases that we can have. I do want to jump back a little bit when he
Okay.
was talking about this logic, like algorithms. He an important thing to highlight from this episode, because I have some things, maybe it's just because it's relevant to me, but there's now a few things that jumps out of me now that I'm going through it again. And one is when he talks about reason or rationality,
Mhm.
because that's something that I'm also starting
Mhm.
to, well, a while back already. It's starting like, okay, I want to also understand this because it feels like important. I mean, we just read about the importance of reason and wisdom. So they go together in a way. And he mentions trying to equate logic with rationality is absurd. That's what when you mentioned you can't be Spock, you can't be Data. So whether you follow Star Wars or Star Trek, you are covered.
My allegiances lie here.
How and he mentions how ra- reason or rationality has to do with ratio, rationing. So it's not like abandon all logic, but it's when, where, how. Sorry.
Okay, I'm gonna go potty. I scared the piss out of me.
It is pretty loud. It usually scares the piss out of me as well.
Okay, what were you saying in that moment?
Rationality is about the ratio, the
Mhm.
rationing. It's about not having logic at all, um, but about when, where, how, and to what degree to be logical in order to overcome self-deception and optimally achieve the goals that we want to achieve. So that is also really important because bias is, of course, a way of self-deception. So we need rationality in our, how it's so well said, to learn how to dynamically self-organize what we find relevant, to know how to
Mhm.
choose our loves. We need rationality. And wisdom, he often says, is the project of overcoming self-deception.
Yeah. I like definitely highlighting ratio and the word rationality. That helps to make a lot more sense out of it. Kind of reminds me of like this discussion that we've had before about how there are very objective minded administrators, and then there are subjective minded organizers. And maybe if the two can work together, but that would be like an analogy for our mind too. All the organizers and all the administrators of our mind could, yeah, figure out when the time is here that we need more administrators and when do we need more so there's like a ratio of the two.
Mhm.
And so yeah, not just logical, and rationality doesn't equal logic. And then yeah, there's the he kind of, I don't know if this is always the case, but here he seemed to use rationality and reason kind of interchangeably too.
I am also very hesitant on that because I just use it like interchangeably. I seem to remember that he does not actually equate it to
Okay.
rationality reason, but I can't remember why, and I might be misremembering. So this is an exciting thing for us to go through because maybe we will discover the answer in future episodes of. So
Yeah.
if for no other reason, Sarah, we need to keep watching to know if reason and rationality are the same thing. And I equate it, but it might be that he's like, no, you shouldn't actually equate the two. So because he's not big on equating terms as we.
Right. No equivocation in this nation. Sounds reasonable.
But does it sound rational?
Well, does it sound logical? Absolutely not.
So that is a very good project for us to keep in the back of our minds, maybe
Yeah.
rationality and reason and what's 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 going on there.
All right. So yeah, there was that thing about the plane crash, which, like you were saying, there's other heuristic measures that are
Yeah.
probably similar to why we think it to be less dangerous to get in a car and take our friend to the airport. so they can
Yeah.
find an airplane.
Which one is this again? It's the availability heuristic.
Yeah.
So information about plane crashes is just more available because it's this big, and so it comes on the news, and everybody sees it, and it's terrifying because most of the time everybody dies. There was actually a crash in the Netherlands where one kid survived, and he's famous now for, well,
Well,
yeah, it's terrible because of course his whole
right.
family was in the plane. But so you could survive, but that doesn't happen that often.
Mm-hmm.
So we see this, the information of plane crashes is very available to us.
Yeah.
Well, every freaking day people die in car crashes, but so it's so normal that it doesn't come on the news anymore. So the information is not directly available to us.
Mm-hmm.
So we judge because we know, it's salient, these plane
Yeah.
crashes. We think like, oh, I hope you're safe because you're getting into this scary thing, airplane, and then we get into this really scary thing, a car, and don't think about it. That's
Mm-hmm.
that's the whole bullshitting ourselves. Like, oh, we're safe. Hoo, we're on land. We're safe, and the poor other person in the air is not safe, which is not true.
Right. Yeah. 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 So you can definitely see how this is a tool that the media sources will use, is like getting your attention to a particular idea by making that most available. These stories are going to be the ones that we run. These are the headlines that we run because, yeah, they make money or whatever it is. And it's usually sensational kind of stuff that kind of, yeah, I don't know, just really hits you emotionally. And so a big plane crash is going to be a lot different. It's perceived a lot differently than a car crash because, yeah, we've all driven by a car crash before, but most of us haven't been in a plane crash ever, or maybe don't even really know.
I've been in probably 3 or 4 car crashes in my life
Yeah, me
personally.
too. Yeah.
Uh, Indeed, I've never been in an airplane crash.
Yeah.
So if you
And
just look at
but it's the thing is like I guess we just never display that story to ourselves, or whatever it is, because we do find that the stories about airplane crashes to be much more
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
salient.
just salient. Yeah,
Mm.
best word. So yes,
So that's when the machinery that was supposed to help us adapt makes us prone to self-deception. That's what's happening
yes,
there.
yeah, and so this is where we said, or you said, I won't say it, but John is a fanboy of Newell and Simon. So, but he's going to offer at least a rebuttal so that he's not too far into this bullshitting himself. So,
He said, "I don't want to be a fanboy." So, but why he's a fanboy of them is because they are illustrating using the scientific method to try to avoid. I don't know why I wrote that, but to
yeah,
to understand mind. They're using the scientific method to understand mind, and that is really important to him.
yeah, to try to avoid, I think, that cyclical
Yeah,
argument of
so
trying
they
to
are.
describe the mind with the mind, or trying to describe intelligence with the mind, even though that's, yeah, it's just turning back on itself.
So they're using analysis or analyzing, formatization, and mechanizing to try to understand the mind. And we both wrote down ontological depth perception. Not that we remember why, but we just love the word ontological depth perception, and we decided that's what we want.
Yes,
I don't
those are
know
the
what it means,
frames.
but I want that.
Yes. If we're talking about frames through which I see the world, I would like to have increased ontological depth perception, please.
Yes. Where do I get those glasses?
Well, take them from John. Just kidding. No, we won't. All right. Um, so yeah, like you said, they're exemplifying the scientific method,
Mhm.
and like Descartes using that graphical mathematical way to mechanize it. So yeah, this idea of um creating AI if I can make the machine to carry out analysis, you want the machine to be able to do the analysis because then you've snuck nothing into it, I guess.
Yeah. So AI is a great way of understanding our own minds because we have like these theories of how our mind works. And then we're like, okay, we think if this, then that. So let's put this in here and see if the machine then automatically goes to and then that. And if it doesn't, then maybe we missed something. That there's this extra step that we need to feed into the machine to copy our processes. So that's how making it like putting it also what's happening in us, try to put it in a mechanize it, is helping us understand our own minds better.
Mm-hmm. It's like the
How,
experimental ground for, or
yeah.
the physical experiment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, it's exactly the physical experiment. Although a lot of these experiments take place, of course, on computers. It's like they have these programs where they have little dots moving around and forming colonies and stuff like that, and seeing how it goes. And yeah,
Mm-hmm. He's saying, like, okay, conducting these experiments of being able to describe intelligence, why we don't want a circular explanation is because of that homunculus thing. So the whole reason that this experimental ground is so important is because we're trying to describe the mind with the mind, where we're running into that circular explanation
yeah.
problem.
How do we see problem that is solved by the homunculus? Is an
Mm.
example of how we do circular um, explanation, which is not
Or
a very good explanation.
triangular, whatever.
Triangle. You are a triangle.
Triangulate. You are a triangle. Yeah.
So what for me stood out here, again, like I said, these are the things that's relevant to me that pops out, is I literally wrote in brackets, "Oh, break my heart." I'm going to read what John said, and then maybe I'll explain a little bit more what I see in it. So Goksai is the whole idea is making us part of the scientific worldview. Giving a scientific explanation of our capacity to generate scientific explanations. We can fit back into the scientific worldview that science has actually excluded us from as the generators of science itself. So Descartes' attempt to feel safe and homed and belonging in this scientific worldview, he's like, well, we can have certainty through the scientific worldview, so then we can feel safe. And that failed.
Mm.
So John is here proposing if we can understand ourselves as well in a scientific view, if we can understand how our minds make science, it means we're part of the whole again and we belong. And it breaks my heart. It's like it's this really, really intelligent, super academic attempt to belong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's something in that because I just quoted you saying something about how it's terrifying if religion does go away because that's what made us human. Like it's something that you've quoted John, maybe on saying, but maybe it's just you. But like deducing that if religion is what made us what we are now as human. So it's interesting to shift that because we did have that whole dying of the universe and the secularization, the scientific revolution. So it's like, yeah, that's the home we created. So now we have to make ourselves at home in the home that we created. And that's what John's kind of endeavoring to do is because, yeah, no, we have to move on. There's no more nostalgia in all of that. We've seen now how that was constructed, and it definitely the patterns of behavior, the patterns of mental patterns, they all worked for the time. But now, because, like you're saying, the insight has been received, you can't unsee it. So now we've made ourselves a nest of science, and we just haven't come to roost in it.
We just don't fit into the nest. Like it's this alien thing to us if we don't know, if we don't cannot understand ourselves or our ability to science, if we cannot
Yeah.
understand that scientifically. So he
Yeah,
wants to
it's
fit us to the nest.
right. And like, how would we ever know that that's our nest if it was never laid out for us that that's the nest for us? Like, so an egg gets, rolls out of the nest or whatever. And so then it's hatched on the ground or something. And it just never knows what its home ever even looked like. So how is it going to have the recognition to see home unless somebody's like, this is yours? Yeah.
Mm. Oh, that's so sad. We are the egg that rolled out of the nest and hatched and have no idea where we belong. And then John says, well, let's make our own nest, people, from science and understanding ourselves scientifically. Well, I think basically everything that's happening in this trying to solve the meaning crisis is trying to make home,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
bringing back that sense of belonging.
It's just hard because of the global, like now I just have to mention it because both global, the crisis that we're undergoing right now is that there was an attack on Israel and now Israel is retaliating and both people are looking for their home. Like the
Mm,
Palestinians, they want their home, and the people of Israel need a home, and that is written down as their home. And then that you had like people living there prior to that, so it's just like home is a big
mm.
like highlighted
And the,
longing.
and the extremes we will go to for creating a home or feeling at home or making a home, claiming a home.
Claiming the home and not leaving the home, even if it's demanded that you'll die if you stay in the home. They would rather die with their home than to leave it. So there's something here.
That to me, that hits me as that is how deep our crisis of being unhomed in this world is. Because people are willing to die as long as they can stay in their home.
And that's interesting that it's like attached to a geographical location in this instance. Um, that we all call that the cradle of civilization. It's where we think we all came from. So of course, like there's that last like effort. This is the cradle of civilization. So this is where kind of society started, you could say, or that Silk Road. So the trade all began there. And yeah, I don't know. I just was sensing into something about that being why all those different groups of people really want to hold on to that particular piece because it's like this is all that's left of the mother or something.
Mm.
This is all that's left of home, even though this whole earth is our home.
Because when I think of that part, I don't think of the cradle of civilization. I think of the cradle of religion, the
Ah,
religion axial age. Especially it's the promised land. It's the holy land. It's free religions were born there.
yeah. Yeah, it is interesting because that's also based on our yeah, heuristics for measuring how these places feel to us.
Yeah.
So because I learned it through social studies and we talked about the Tigris and the Euphrates and that being like, yeah, the big garden. Like you just think of like, oh, okay, this is where agriculture started. This is where people started settling. This is where people started, yeah. Yeah, they weren't nomads anymore because of this place and they were able to exchange with one another. And so, yeah, academically is how I learned about the place. I didn't learn about the place through. It really didn't occur to me that Bethlehem could still be a real place, that Jerusalem was still a real place. They all, like when I was learning them, even in my, Baptist church, it still felt like a myth from back in the olden times, and that those places didn't exist anymore. Like, because I guess the restructuring of borders and things like that, it's like those are now the places. And you just don't think about how all of that space was there when you're reading those names of the places. That's not the names anymore. So unless you like make it a point to make it more salient by looking at a map while you read it and having that map able to translate for you where those places are that they're talking about, it didn't occur to me until we went to Turkey
Mm.
and I actually saw them. I saw
Mm.
aqueducts, I saw columns. I was like, this shit's real. I'm in an amphitheater right now. So yeah, it didn't occur to me that those ancient places still existed in real life. I don't know how else to say it other than it seemed like, yeah, you could build that as a set and people, maybe people actually go to these places too, but I don't know why. Nothing felt real to me as a kid. So
When my favorite, most meaningful moment in Israel, when I visited exactly 5 years ago, I got a Facebook memory yesterday, and I shared it with my friend who went with me. Exactly 5 years ago, we were in Tel Aviv. So then we started our
wow,
journey. Yeah, exactly 5 years ago.
that's
And
crazy.
yeah, the most meaningful moment, well, there were a lot of meaningful moments, but the one of them was like in Engedi. There's a um, a cave where David is said to have hid from Saul when Saul was trying to kill him, or Absalom. I'm not sure who it was when he was trying to flee, his son or his predecessor, but he was said to have hidden in that place. But when we walked there, when we came to the river, the stream just in front of the cave, there was like only two tourists, which is really weird. And one was sitting meditating, and the other one was obviously her partner, keeping a watchful eye. So we just kept dead quiet, took our shoes off, and sat by the water with our feet in the water. And the psalm, like, you bring me to, I don't know it in English, um, you bring me to waters that's peaceful. Psalm 23, I think. Na waters waar rus is, lei hy my heen. That was just synced in because it was David writing those words. And here I was sitting where David was sitting so many years ago. And that was just one of the most real moments. And because, of course, the city's changed. And although when I was walking through Jerusalem, what kept coming to my mind, because there's so many people selling so many stuff, that you have made my house a place of thieves and people selling. So that was coming through my mind as well. But it's just lovely being at that water in the nature, because nature's, nature more stable than the cities.
Yeah, so homing us. You said cognitive science is making us part of the scientific worldview, and in doing so is homing us. And yeah, that's important. In exemplifying the scientific method, he says this is a naturalistic imperative in cognitive science.
Mm.
Okay, how I generate scientific explanations, my intelligence, my ability to generate science. It needs to
So
show this project isn't making progress.
yeah, but he says it does actually. Like, so if you want to show that something isn't working, you have to show that it's not making any progress. You can't just, it's like when people are against science, they're like, oh, but you can't prove this and you can't show that. And he says that's bullshit. That's not how you say a project's not working, because there will always be things that we still can't explain. And just because science can't explain something doesn't mean science doesn't work. What you should be able to show is this is a dead end. It's not going anywhere. It's not making any progress. And it's like, yeah, well, we can't say that about science. I mean, we know a shitload about a lot of things, and look what we've created. You are in America, and I'm in the Netherlands, and we are speaking to each other. Thank you, science. You know, so there's progress. So science does work. It's yeah. So we're not gonna bash science. That's basically what he's saying.
Okay.
But we at this moment, because at this moment, we still can't explain the scientific view itself and how our minds work scientifically. So at this moment, we still don't feel at home in it. But he says there's hope.
Now I'm into criticizing.
Yes, me too.
Okay. Okay.
We're
So
done making our home. We're now going to criticize.
now let's go after. Yeah, Descartes had a lot of people disagreeing with him, so these guys are no exception to having people criticize their work. So, what I have written here is necessary but not sufficient. They failed to notice the assumption that all problems are essentially the same.
He says that they're prone to essentialism, which in itself is not bad, but not everything. Because Wittgenstein had that whole like you can show that he used games, like you can't deduce anything every species to an essence, and problems is very much one of the things that you can't reduce to an essence. And he says it's kind of ironic because it's a bias which they fail to see, and they work with biases. So it's kind of like, yeah, inevitable how fallible humanity is. And then if all problems are the same, we only need one essential problem solving strategy. But that's not the case. All problems aren't the same, which would have been great. Imagine if you had like 1, 2, 3 steps and then this problem is solved.
Do you know
Or
how
maybe
many people make so much money saying that that is the case? And they are liars. They're all liars. Certifications are bullshit. Life experience. No, I'm just kidding. It's not always possible, but yeah, there are a lot of people that try to sell these 1, 2, 3 step processes that are maybe helpful to them. Like maybe they did actually help them, and maybe they've now constructed this is the way I solve my problem in hindsight after
yeah.
everything was done. And it's supposed to be like more valuable because it's in hindsight, but it's like, no, everything has changed. Nothing is the same as it was when you were solving this problem. So yeah,
And even if it was the same, all problems are not the same. So
exactly.
you can't solve my problem with your solution. That's
Right.
just not, yeah. You can gain some insight, but yeah. And because
Okay.
that's a big problem, because they thought, well, all problems are essentially the same, they fail to notice the importance of formulation of the problem, which, if I remember, I don't know if he says it I can't now think if he says it in this, but I know it's really important for John, like the formulation of the problem. I think he says it later. Like that's like if you can formulate the problem well, you basically have the solution. It's although this sounds like a 1, 2, 3 step, but that's not what he means because it's terribly difficult to formulate a problem well.
Yeah. Easier said than done,
Yeah.
definitely.
That's the what you fall into, the thinking where you fall into if you fail to recognize that all problems are not the same.
Right, right. So he says there are different kinds of problems. There are what he's calling well-defined or ill-defined problems. Well-defined problems examples include something like multiplication problems. A lot of things in our education system are helping us to be able to construct well-defined problems, or I guess solve well-defined problems.
Mm.
But then yeah, there's the ill-defined
Yeah. So
problems
what,
that
what he says is basically education, what they do is they give you a well-defined problem and you have to solve it. That's where it starts. They should start by saying, okay, here's the scenario, what is the problem? So that you can
mm-hmm,
define. But they
mm-hmm,
don't do that. They just say, here's the problem, solve it. And that's the second step should supposed to be. But we start with that in our education.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's different models for educating kids too, which one of them I remember is the it's funny because now I'm mixing his 4 P's and I think he's got 5 E's also, but there was like 5 E's of learning, which were like exploration, lots of other things I don't remember. But the whole method there was called it's not inquisitive.
Socratic method, although John doesn't like method, but it sounds like a Socratic way of.
It is, yeah. It's essentially the Socratic method, just asking questions. So, yeah. But anyway, there's different ways that kids can learn. That's not easy to standardize. So you can see now why standardization is a problem, but it's also a solution. And so it's like, how do you teach if you can't measure that the kids are actually learning? And if it's
Yeah.
just a willy-nilly, we're going to go outside and explore today, and while you're exploring you find experiments and you're like, hey, what do you see going on here? And then the kids tell you what they see, and then but it takes so long and there's no way to know if they're going to be successful after that because we haven't been measuring. So it's like, yeah, the um those kinds of models, the Montessori model, the um, Steiner kind of schools, they're they're only going to work in small
Small.
groups. Yeah. Yeah.
With a very patient and wise teacher.
The problem is well formulated for us in those well defined problems. What's missing in an ill defined problem is how to formulate the problem to begin with. And that requires relevance realization.
Because the important thing is an ill-defined problem, you don't really know what the relevant initial state is. You kind of know the initial state. You know, I'm in a situation that I don't want to be in, but you don't know exactly what is the relevant things that keeps me in this situation. What do I need to change? Um, you don't necessarily know, the relevant operators that you need to use. You don't even know necessarily the relevant goal state. Um, like, where do I really want to go? Um, very likely you don't know the relevant constraints either. So that is the ill-defined problem. It's like, well, I know I don't like where I am, but I don't really know what exactly I don't like about it or where I would want to go.
Okay, yes. And so in there, I said that now Simon is having an affair because he's left Newell and he is working with Kaplan in 1990. This is urgent and necessary news for me to cover.
As bad as the stars, really.
So these two are now going to mutilate a chessboard, which we also take issue with.
Okay. I have an example of an unmutilated chessboard.
Unmutilated. Thank God for that. Thank you.
So what they're going to do is they're going to take this little block away, and they're going to take this little block away. I also have the I Ching written on the different
I was
blocks.
wondering what was written on them.
It's the I Ching. So I'm taking 1 and 58 away, which is the creative, and 58 I'm not quite sure. I can't remember what.
I'll leave it in if you're right.
So they're taking these away, and then they're asking, can you still fill the the whole space with dominoes? That's 1 white and one square white, 1 square black. So then people make the mistake. They think they need to. It's a covering. So can you use 31 blocks to cover 62, which in fact you should be able to do. But they fail to notice that this is white and this is white. And if you only have dominoes that's black and white, and you take 2 of the same color away, what's left is not the same. It's impossible. That's, yeah. So, and then it becomes quite obvious. If you see, okay, the colors matter, then it's an obvious solution. But if you don't look at that and you think it's only a covering problem, it becomes this really, really painful thing to try to work out. I know the first 2 times I went through the Awakening series, I was sitting there trying to calculate in my mind, mentally covering the whole board with dominoes. But yeah, the third time, luckily, I saw it immediately. I don't know if I have a memory or because I've grown, but
Learning
yeah.
knowledge. It reminds me of this assignment that a teacher passed out one time when I was probably in third or fourth grade. And it was like a packet. And you might know where I'm going with this, but I'm sitting there working the packet out and I've been like working on it for like an hour or two, maybe. Some people start submitting theirs. And turns out there was like one or two students that read the instructions that said just do numbers, this and this. So they were done immediately. And so but that was the thing, is like my attention didn't immediately go to the instructions. It went to the instructions of each one of the questions.
Oh,
But had
yeah,
we framed it from the beginning of you're only going to have to answer two of these questions and then you're done. So
yeah,
that was like a do you follow instructions
yeah.
assignment as opposed to an actual assignment for content.
That's one of the main things, and that's why I got a job teaching how to read sacred text, because that's the main thing. People don't read. If you just read what's written,
Mm-hmm.
it just simplifies things a lot. But one of my professor that I talk a lot about so much, the one of the free men that had like a profound influence was words. What he did once, he gave out a passage from the Bible, but in Hebrew, the Hebrew text. But he gave it upside down. And as he gave it, he just watched the kids to see if they can actually read Hebrew or not. That was his whole test. So no one turned the page around, almost. By the time he did it with my class, I knew about it. So, you know, so I turned the page around. I don't know if I would have turned the page around if I didn't know about it. But that was the only assignment. He just wanted to see if they can read Hebrew or not. And of course, if you can, you know it's upside down. If you
Mm-hmm.
can't, exactly the same. The
Mm-hmm.
scroll. So it was a really good test that he did, and yeah,
Okay, so that was nice to see in a not disassembled chessboard, not mutilated chessboard.
mutilated. It's, mutilated. Like that's a really cruel word
I
choice.
know, jeez, mutilated. But yeah, removing two of the white spaces or two of the corner spaces because the corners that oppose each other are always going to be the same color.
Yeah, you can also have black and black, of course.
Yep. So either way, if you remove two of the same color, there's not a way that the 31 dominoes could cover a black and white
Mm.
pair.
The whole example is how something that seems so complicated, if you just reframe it, it
Mm-hmm.
becomes obvious. And they call it in search of insight, because that is what's required to move from complicated to obvious. You need to have some sort of insight.
This makes so much sense for things like Vision Quest even more now. It's not just necessarily to remove bacteria from your gut that aren't serving you, but also just clearing everything out. You don't have there's nothing to consider with food. There's not even anything to consider with how far I can go out of this circle that I'm in. It's like the only thing that I can do is just sit here with my thoughts. Okay. Well, by the end of this, we're intended to have the ability to reconstruct our salience landscape. So looking forward to that. We've also selected a problem apiece to try to follow through the rest of this part of the series, since we're cognitive sciencing the shit out of everything, as Matt Damon might say in the movie Martian. But yeah, so I mean, we definitely can already tell how this project has an impact on our life, whether we knew that to begin with or not. Um, so now we can actually utilize it, which I think is kind of the point, was like this whole lead up to from the history was just understanding that it was a thing. And now we're going to be able to utilize these tools. So we're going to take an active step in utilizing the tools instead of allowing the meaning crisis, the awakening from the meaning crisis series to sweep us off our feet as it has been doing.
Mm. So yeah, we both just decided on a problem, which is at this stage still quite ill-defined. So our first step is going to be define the problem based on this episode. We're both going to try to define our problem. And it just occurred to me as you were speaking that it is actually problems that to both of us affect our sense of meaning and belonging in the world. And, how to, So I think it's really relevant, and it's fun. It's a fun game. Like
Yeah.
I don't really have the guts to tell everyone exactly what the problem is, but if they have listened carefully, I'm sure they'll be able to deduce my problem.
I think I've made hints at mine too, but yeah, definitely has an effect on our full way of making sense of the world. So
Yeah, and we're going to tackle it one problem at a time. Makes me think of I think Iris Murdoch comes to mind, but that's not her. It's a woman that actually uses John's work to cultivate wisdom, to help people cultivate wisdom, and that's her saying, one problem at a time. Iris Stamberger. She will probably pronounce it differently than I do. Yeah, this is the woman who gave me the one problem at a time idea. Actively working to cultivate wisdom. So of course I'm totally on board with that. Returning to Socrates as portrayed by Plato in the Republic, Book 9. From what point of view then, and on what ground can we say that a man is profited by injustice or intemperance or other baseness, which will make him a worse man, even though he acquire money or power by his wickedness? So the whole thing about the Republic may be good to give context. In the beginning, it starts with what is justice, and then there's one specific guy that says, justice is just for fools because you gain more by being injustice as long as you don't suffer injustice. So this whole thing is like Socrates saying, no, that's not true. So here he comes from, is it really profitable to be to practice injustice? And then he comes to the conclusion, no, from no point of view, because what shall he profit if his injustice be undetected and unpunished? He who is undetected only gets worse, whereas he who is detected and punished has the brutal part of his nature silenced and humanized. The gentler element in him is liberated, and his whole soul is perfected and ennobled by the acquirement of justice and temperance and wisdom, more than the body ever is by receiving gifts of beauty, strength, and health, in proportion as the soul is more honorable than the body. So this immediately made me think of Mark 8, verse 36. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his soul? I think it's the same idea. I have to make noise so it comes to me.
Let you know.